Hello, everyone, and good evening. It is Thursday evening of Monsoon Awareness Week. We've had a great week of discussing all the different threats of monsoon season, from heat to lightning to downburst winds. But tonight we're going to focus on flash flooding. And, I find it interesting that we talked about at the beginning of the week on Sunday how it looked like this week we were going to see all the threats from Monsoon Awareness Week during this week. It was kind of impressive. And sure enough, true to form, yesterday, even during the hangout, we had lightning at my house, and we were talking about lightning, and we had a lot of wind. So we were covering the downburst winds. I know we had some of those in parts of southern New Mexico yesterday. We had heat earlier in the week, and I think it was still pretty hot in parts of Arizona today. But today, the moisture started to come back in here, and I've been sitting in the other room closely monitoring for flash flooding. So it's very appropriate that today we're talking about flash flooding because here today, tomorrow, and especially as we move into Saturday, we're going to see the threat for flash flooding begin to really ramp up. And today is the 14th, so officially, I guess we could say happy monsoon eve kind of thing, because tomorrow starts the monsoon. All right. So I want to go down the line here real quickly and introduce everybody. Also joining me on the call today is Mr. John Fawcett. He's the meteorologist in charge in El Paso. Thanks for joining us, John. Going on down the line, we got Glenn Lader. He is forecaster in the Tucson office. How are you doing, Glenn? Or you can just wave. Very good. Very good. We got Dan Burke. He's WCM in beautiful Las Vegas.
Nice.
And then our special guest of the night, Mr. Craig McDougall, says you're with the. What's your position there at Clark County Flood Control District?
I'm the senior hydrologist for the district. I've been with the Clark County Regional Flood Control District for 11 years. I have been in that position since I retired from the Air Force after being a meteorologist for 20 years.
Very good. So you jumped over to the wet side from meteorology to hydrology.
Exactly.
Very good. All right. Well, I'm sure we will be plying you with many questions tonight. Okay. As we move on down the line, we've got Miss Bianca there in the Phoenix. She's a forecaster there in the Phoenix office. How are you doing tonight, Miss Bianca?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Very good. And last but never least, Mr. Alex Tardy there at the San Diego office. How are you doing tonight, Alex? Doing good. Very good. All right. We are talking flash flooding, and one of the first things I want to show, kind of kick things off with, is this kind of graphic here, where we talked about it on Monday, how heat is an underrated killer. But guess what? Flash flooding ranks right up there. As a matter of fact, I think in the last year that these statistics were taken, flash flooding was the number one. As far as the single year, last year we had more deaths because of flash flooding than any other weather hazard, even more than heat, but just barely. But on the 30-year average, it's heat that has the most. But for sure, flash flooding is definitely something that we need to take definite seriousness of. And we're going to go over some safety tips tonight. We're going to talk about why it is such a serious concern, especially here in the Southwest. But I'll just jump straight to Mr. John Fawcett and tell, in your opinion, here in the West, why is it a little more concerned, or is flash flooding here in the West different than, let's say, east of here?
Well, it takes less rainfall to cause flash flooding here because of our terrain, because of our soil. Doesn't seem to soak it in as readily as, further east of into the plains in the south and that part of the country. So that's one issue. And of course, because of the terrain and the sloping, the water can get going faster, more quickly. Those are a couple of reasons. And the other is I guess the psychology of people thinking, well, we're out west, we don't get that much rain. We're not going to have flooding issues. So those are just a few things to throw out there.
Sure. And let me jump over to Craig, because he's our resident hydrologist today. is there anything else you'd like to add, or kind of like a different tack there as far as is kind of a different animal out here in the western part of the U.S.?
Well, in an area that gets just over 4 inches of rain annually, the big problem is when all that rain decides to come out of the clouds all at once, and then it's got to flow someplace. Soil compactment is a big problem here, so it just takes a little bit of rainfall to get the ground saturated, and then after that, the rainfall just becomes runoff, and it's just going to flow to the lowest point it can find.
And then, like John mentioned, we have so much topography that combined with the desert lack of vegetation, really kind of a 1-2 that helps us give us kind of enhanced flash flood risk. And I forgot, I got to load up Facebook here, so everyone just bear with me while I kind of load that up. But let me ask Glenn here, what's the difference? Because this is one of these things where we have actual different kind of scales of products. We have a watch and a warning. And I was wondering if you could kind of walk people through what the difference between a flash flood watch versus a flash flood warning is.
Yeah, Tim. So basically, we have some delineation, like you mentioned, between watches and warnings. Watches are basically put out because we think the threat or possibility of an event that could produce flash flooding is there. Usually that would be anywhere probably from maybe 4 to 6 hours out to maybe even a day or two in advance if it looks like there's a pretty well-defined weather system coming into the area. More significant than that is, of course, a flash flood warning. And basically what that means is the flooding is ongoing or it's imminent. And that's really life and property is in danger at that point. So that's why the flash flood warnings are issued. And one really neat thing about flash flood warnings is they go over the wireless emergency alert system on cell phones. So if you happen to be in the area that is under the warning, as long as your wireless emergency alerts are turned on, your phone is going to send you, or you'll receive a text message or something very similar to a text message that will tell you that you're in the area with a flash flood warning, and to find out more information from the National Weather Service or local media.
Very good. I forgot to mention the WIA messages. We had mentioned those briefly when we were talking about dust storm, but for sure the WIA message gets everyone's attention. It's one of the newer tools that we've worked in conjunction with the cell phone carriers. That when we issue that flash flood warning, it only covers like flash flood warning, tornado warning, dust storm warning, and a couple other like volcano eruption warnings and tsunami warnings, but it doesn't cover severe thunderstorm warnings. I know there's been some talk about doing those for higher end severe thunderstorm warnings, but I like it. Flash flood warnings, that gets everybody's attention because that's what can really cause problems real fast for people. But I did want to show, kind of playing off of what Glenn was talking about, the differences between the watch and the warning. Here's kind of a way to visualize the difference between a watch and a warning, is that you got a cupcake watch is when you got all the ingredients are there, but it's not a warning until it's actually there in front of you. So that's kind of the difference there. Like Glenn was saying, when you have all the ingredients in place, like we'll actually have either into Friday or into Saturday. I know several of the offices, including ours, Tucson, maybe even Flagstaff, maybe Phoenix, maybe Albuquerque, are right on the edge of whether we're going to need to issue a flash flood watch with all of this moisture coming up from the tropical storm, or what's left of Tropical Storm Bud. And I'm going to show real quick the current track for Bud, just so that we're all up to speed on that, because it looks like he's right on the tip of the Baja right now. And here's the current track for Bud. And as you can see, by Saturday noon, just south of kind of the Arizona-New Mexico state line, and don't really focus on where the actual center of that D is, because there's going to be a lot of associated tropical moisture coming up to give us a lot of problems, especially in eastern Arizona. And it looks like it's focused eastern Arizona on into western New Mexico. And I know that we have several burn scars in those areas. I wish Albuquerque was on the call tonight. But Speaking of burn scars, I was wondering. Oh, Alex went away. I was going to ask him a question there real quick. Oh, Alex, you guys you've had problems in the past with you get a burn, you get a fire in the hills, and then you get a lot of rain on top of that come winter time, and that leads to a lot of flash flooding off of these burn scars, right?
Yeah, that's right, Tim. We get kind of both of them. So we get the classic monsoon flooding where it's a dry wash and all of a sudden you get 2 inches of rain and it's raging down, sometimes even into a city. Like last year in Palm Springs, they had an event that was pretty amazing where people were actually screaming because it looked like the water was going to basically just take their house away.
Oh, wow.
But what you're talking about is the debris flow, and we have fires all the time, it seems, more so lately. And then either in the summer, when we get a monsoon thunderstorm, heavy rain, torrential downpour, it's all about the rates. And then if it's winter time, it's also about the rates. Sometimes it seems like it's about the amount of rain or how long it rains. It's been raining for a week. The hillside's going to come down. But what we've seen with most of these fire scars, whether it's winter or summer, it's just the rate. The same thing happened with the Thomas Fire up in LA area. And we see it here too. And when the rain comes down, basically more than a half inch per hour, these debris flows form on these fresh scars or fire scars that we call them. And it can be devastating. Some of them are nuisance, some of them are life-threatening, and it's a pretty scary situation. So whenever we have wildfires, that's probably one of our number one concern once the fire's out is when and how much rain is going to fall in that area.
And it's we have an active burn scar right now, and what happens in these burn scars, so people understand, is that the fire, if it's a hot fire, it burns out all the understory, it gets rid of all the lower vegetation, and a lot of the resins in the ground, the heat kind of heats it up, and then it just kind of glues it closed. I tell people when I have to talk to them about these burn scars, is essentially you built a Walmart parking lot above, in this canyon where there was this fire, and it is nearly 100% runoff right after the fire happens. I know that there are several fires in the West that have just happened. We had one up by Mescalero, between Mescalero and Ruidoso, called the Soldier Canyon Fire. And I mean, I was literally out here 30 minutes ago watching thunderstorms pop up all around this burn scar, and I'm on the phone with the tribe up there as far as is it falling? The radar was saying it was just off to one side of the burn scar, but everyone's very concerned because it's like Alex was saying, it all comes out when you get that rain on that burn scar. The runoff is a lot. It's filled with debris, and it comes out a lot faster than it would if it was just regular vegetation, because it's not able to sink in, and then there's no vegetation to hold it back. So and usually it takes at least 2, if not 3 years, to kind of Mother Nature to kind of break up that soil and get some vegetation growing up through it. So now, I mentioned a Walmart parking lot. I was wondering if Craig, if you could talk about some of the challenges that you have with these heavy rains that we get in our bigger cities. So places like Las Vegas or Phoenix or El Paso, where we get a lot of rain real quickly over these urban watersheds.
Right. If I could just tag on to your earlier comments about the runoff after the fire in our burn scar. We had a significant burn event several years ago called the Carpenter 1 fire. And prior to that fire, the downstream basin is a huge basin called Kyle Canyon, and it's a mile in length, and it has a capacity to hold 45 feet of water depth. And right after that Carpenter 1 fire, the first heavy rainfall in the Kyle Canyon region caused a huge runoff event to occur. And what happened is the basin filled up with about 30 feet of water. That was the high water mark. However, only about half of that capacity was actually water. The rest of it was ash. And that poses another challenge, because shortly after that first rain event, we had another rain event on top of that. And the basin was already full with 15 feet of ash. and then you have additional rainfall runoff into that basin. Fortunately, that second event wasn't as strong as the first, but it was a cascading effect, so that towards the fall, after the monsoon season, the Public Works Department had a field day cleaning that basin. It took them a couple of months with several hundred thousands of truckloads of debris that they had to scour out of that basin to clear it for future flood events. But rainfall in an urban environment is definitely a challenge, because when it rains, the first runoff course for the rainfall is going to be the streets. The general public doesn't realize that our main arteries in the streets also double as flood control channels for initial runoff. And it's not until the runoff gets into the gutters that then eventually they get into the main channels that will allow the flow to move away from the urban areas. And in the case of Las Vegas, all flow winds up in Lake Mead eventually.
So here's a video that I found online. I think this was from a couple years ago. Where could you walk us through just what we're seeing here, if you're familiar with this video? Maybe Dan, you could chime in too.
Is this the 95 overtopping event?
No, this is the Moapa flood in September of 2014. This is I-15.
I recognize that now. Yes.
Yeah.
Over in the Weiser Wash area, we have a network of gauges that was reporting heavy rainfall, probably the heaviest rainfall I've seen with the district. Several inches of rain. By that, a couple of gauges had 3.5 inches. One gauge exceeded 4 inches of rain. And remember, Las Vegas only gets just over 4 inches of rainfall annually. So we had our annual rainfall plus in this area, and the radar was suggesting even higher rainfall returns in between our gauges. We just weren't lucky enough to gauge the center of the runoff. And at the time, the Nevada Department of Transportation had a contract out to widen and improve the interstate. And not only did the flow wash away that work, it washed away the interstate. And you can see in the video, there's a minivan that got caught in the runoff, and it didn't go into the gully, but it came very close. Fortunately, as I recall, the driver and the occupants were rescued before the vehicle eventually was lost. But that just is a testimony to the power of nature in Southern Nevada and the Southwest in general.
Wow. Wow. And like you said, I know that we're a little unique here in the Southwest, because I tell people, I grew up in Oklahoma, and, every street has a storm drain, and there's all kinds of water. But for a lot of the major cities, your streets are your storm drains. Your streets are how the water gets from the high ground to the low ground, whatever that is. And I know that around El Paso, and I'm sure this is the way it is in like Tucson and Vegas and Phoenix, that you've got catch basins all around the city, and the water is always trying to flow in that direction and trying to get in there. And if it just falls in the wrong place, and we've had problems that some of these catch basins where all these streets kind of funnel that water, it can get pretty deep and cause some concern. We've had cars swept into these basins and a lot of debris, and so definitely the Southwest is kind of a unique thing as far as how we have to handle things in the urban environment as far as the flooding goes. Hey, Dan, do you guys have any slot canyons in your CWA, your area of responsibility?
No, most of our area, we do have some in the very edge of our area, because we extend all the way through Mojave County, very close to Zion National Park. But fortunately for them, but most of the problems that are associated with the slot canyons occur further north into Utah.
Okay, but could you talk maybe about some of the unique threats that those slot canyons do present to the hikers as they're in there?
Sure. Slot canyons, as you may or may not know, they're very, very narrow canyons, and they're very beautiful. So a lot of people want to hike through them, and they do. But it's a very, very, very narrow channel, which means that it takes only a small amount of water to fill them up to depths of several feet, 20, 30 feet at times, even more. So yeah, we encourage people to make sure they're they check the forecast and make sure that they are out of the slide canyons before the rain starts falling. We had an incident a couple years ago. This was in 2015, where we had we do one of our more narrow canyons, and it is right on the Utah border. We had an incident where we had a lot of rain in the morning, and this storm also went through Zion National Park. And we had another storm come by a couple hours later and dump 3 inches of rain in a very, very narrow canyon. And unfortunately, this was the cause of, we had 13 fatalities in our area, and there were another 7 fatalities in Zion National Park due to the same storm that went over the slide canyon. So, yeah, if you're a hiker and outdoors person and really like slide canyons, and there's a lot to like about them, they're very, very dangerous during any rainfall.
Right, because it can, like you mentioned, the rain doesn't even have to happen right on top of you. It can be actually miles and miles away, and then it works its way down through the canyon. And you just got to be, that's the real trick there, is that, you know, you have to be aware of the forecast and where the rain is falling in the headwaters for that canyon. That can definitely be some problems. I'm going to show another screen here. It's going to be talking about some of the safety concerns. But I'd like Miss Bianca, if you could walk us through some of the issues related to cars and driving across the road, as far as how much water it takes to sweep a car off the road and things like that. And I've got that kind of the numbers here on the screen. So if you can kind of walk us through it, that would be great. Kind of talk us through here. Oh, I can't hear you. You're still muted.
Oh, I thought I unmuted it.
There
Sorry
you go.
about that. So I would say every single monsoon season, we run into the problem where not everyone, but a lot of people are getting rescued from their cars, either being stuck in the water because they tried to cross a wash that was just way too high, or their car is actually flowing down what looks like rapids. And people are always so shocked by it, but it really only takes 12 inches or a foot of water to sweep away a car. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're always telling everyone, if you encounter a flooded roadway, don't even try to cross it. You have no idea how deep it is, especially at night. And you have also no idea what's in the water. I know out east, I'm from Florida, so we dealt with a lot more weird creatures that could be in flooded water than here, but still, that's definitely something to worry about, especially with like electric poles. Usually those are all knocked down during strong thunderstorms from the winds, so that could even be in the water. So it's just not a good idea to cross any type of flooded roadway. And
here I have some of the safety tips related to we were just talking about, because I want everyone to be aware that, you know, don't cross a flooded roadway, like Bianca said. Be patient. We have the saying, turn around, don't drown, which is great words of advice. And what I have to encourage the kids sometimes is, you know, stay away from flooded water, or, you know, these creeks or these arroyos. We had a case where we had those catch basins, like I was mentioning, and there was water flowing in, and there were some kids playing next to one of these catch basins, and one of the kids slipped in. And unfortunately, I don't remember the outcome, but it's just not a place you want to be, because either the water is moving, or you never know when it's going to erode away the bank or anything like that. That's going to cause you know, you to slip into that water. And then, like we've mentioned a couple times, there's all kinds of debris and stuff in this water. You know, I got a question here on Facebook, and maybe anybody can chime in, because it says, does the monsoon season affect our winter weather? And basically, the way I see it is, it's no. It's a summertime kind of thing, because it's that seasonal shift in the winds that kind of brings us that monsoon moisture. Does that sound right, everybody?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. Okay, very good. So we've got our saying, turn around, don't drown, which I think goes a long way in helping people. You know, one of the sayings that I like to say to people is you're better wet than dead. There's been studies that have said that some people, or that people in general, if they're in their car and the rain is coming down, and they see the threat, they actually sit there and go, well, I don't know if I want to get out, because I'll get wet. You know, I don't want to get wet. I don't want to get cold. So they've developed this saying, it's better wet than dead. And one of the things that we tell people is either don't drive across a flooded roadway, but if you find yourself in the middle of something, move to higher ground. Get out, get wet, and move to higher ground as soon as you can, because that's, you know, cars, like we said, like Bianca mentioned, the cars are very easily washed off the roads. And I think we've all seen examples of those cars just being washed off the road. So I want to go back to Craig now. Craig, do you have anything else, any other kind of concerns that you as a hydrologist, because we look at this from a meteorological point of view, how do you as a hydrologist view things as far as these flash floods go?
Well, when I forward flash flood warnings issued by your office to the various impacted entities, one of the things we do is tailor those products to different public works entities. For example, say if thunderstorms are rolling into the Las Vegas Valley from the south, I'll tailor the warnings so that our southern public works agencies are notified first, and then I'll let the folks in the center part of the valley know that, hey, you're not under the gun yet, but the storms are coming, and let the folks in the northern end of the valley know that this may not happen for another couple of hours, but it gives them enough lead time to watch the approaching weather. But at the same time, when I redisseminate those warnings and advisories, at the bottom of my email, I always include the phrase that you don't have to have rain at your location to have flash flooding. And that was certainly the case in the 70s when we've had heavy rains occur in the far western part of the valley. The tourists along the strip didn't think anything of it, only to find out later on that the cars were submerged when that flash flood wall of water came down into the parking lot. So it's just a general awareness of what's going on, not just at your current location, but in your general area.
And I think one of the things that's changed since the 70s, though, we could say, is the WE alerts. And because I might not be aware that it rained 2 inches in the foothills, but if I'm in that polygon for that flash flood warning, my phone should make a noise, and I should at least be looking around then for further information, kind of thing.
Exactly. And one of the things we're proud of in the district since our inception, one of the challenges has been to divert flow from some of these natural washes or improve natural washes to take the flow away from busy streets, busy portions of the strip, and divert the flow so people aren't impacted as much. We still have a long way to go. We still have a 30-year plan that we're working on to add more detention basins and channels, but we've made a lot of progress over the years. We're proud of the ability to divert water away from houses and reduce flooding overall.
And, you know, I wish we had more time to talk about that, because El Paso's been going, we had a big flood back here in 2006. And John, can you kind of describe that real quickly? And then I want to talk about, like Craig was talking about, some of the changes that they've made here in town.
Well, and you remember that well, Tim, because you were in front of the TV cameras here at the office. That's where there was about 8 or even more inches of rain on the Franklin Mountains that flooded both sides of El Paso, but especially the west side. It was amazing. Even the river, the Rio Grande River, rarely floods, but there was even a little bit of a river flood there. And we that 8 to 10 inches of rain in one spot or two, you combine that with 3 to 4 inches area wide, it was, I think, $300 million in damage, probably our greatest costing natural disaster we've had here in El Paso. And one thing that almost happened, an earthen dam in the Juarez Mountains over in Juarez, Mexico, nearly gave away. And that would have really, really been disastrous for downtown El Paso. So, and I think this was about a day after Tucson had a pretty big flash flood. So that 2 or 3 day period was tragic in the midst of our wettest monsoon in El Paso's record.
It was, I remember it. It was very impressive, day after day of rain, like you said. But I know for the city of El Paso, we had lots of flooding, and then they started making their changes. But like Craig said, it's not like you can move buildings and divert water on a turn of a dime. It takes years and years. And I know that El Paso, and it sounds like Vegas, is doing the same thing. And I imagine other major cities are trying to figure out how to divert that water, because it's been my experience is that water is pretty clever, and it knows which way it wants to go. And man can try to change it as much as it wants, but unless you do it just right, it tends to want to go back to the way that it was. And that's what causes people problems. We get water into, it seems like John mentioned, it seemed like on that first week of August back in 2006, every day there was a different kind of what's going to happen now? Where is the water going to show up next? And it was amazing how the water and the force of water that we've talked about, how it can wash cars off the road and get into buildings and things. In 2006, I saw water popping up in places I'd never seen it before. So especially in like an urban watershed, you put a bunch of rain down and then water starts showing up in weird and different places. Well, again, just like last night, 30 minutes have already run by, and I appreciate everyone taking their time. Real quickly, I'm going to run down the line and say, see if anyone, give me your 30-second elevators pitch for what we need to do. Oh, before I do that, I want to show that the tweet that I sent out right before that I came in. We were talking about burn scars. It may be a little hard to tell, but this was a tweet I sent out talking about burn scars, and that little pink kind of circle almost looks like a heart there. There in the middle of the screen is what we're calling our Soldier Canyon fire. And you can see we had thunderstorms to the south of it, to the east of it, very close to it. So that was something we're definitely watching. We mentioned that briefly about how these burn scars, the amount of rain falling on them to cause a flood is much, much less. And where it might take in the mountains inch to inch and a half of rain in 30 minutes, it's a quarter inch, half an inch of rain in 10 or 15 minutes that will cause a major debris flow coming down. So it's just something that we're already aware of, and we're already seeing. We're not even officially into monsoon season until midnight tonight, and we're already dealing with some of the effects of it. So real quickly, let's run down the line. Glenn, what's your one takeaway for tonight?
Don't drive into flooded roads. Or
turn around, don't drown.
Yeah, that's just really, when it comes to flash flooding, if you stay clear of, when driving, stay clear of flooded roads, places where you shouldn't be, it's just a much better decision.
Definitely, definitely. And I tell the story, and we had one of our co-op observers who was driving down from Albuquerque to a little town south of Hillsboro. And she had already driven 2 hours, and she got within 5 minutes of her house, and the water was going across the road at such a level. She has to get through all these low water crossings on the way home, but there's one that she had to stop, and she had to backtrack an hour to go all the way around to get to her house, instead of coming in from the north, back around to the south. But she took our advice, turn around, don't drown, because you can never tell if the road's even there, how deep that water is. So excellent words of advice. Hey, Dan, what's your one takeaway from tonight?
I would say if you live in an area that has a lot of flood channels, if the water is flowing towards you, it's flowing into those channels and going by. Most of the flood channels have fences and to keep people out of there, but we have children who like to play in the water when it's running, and if it's running fast, every year we have people who are swept away, and some are rescued, and unfortunately some aren't. So teach your kids, teach your teenagers, stay out of the water. It's really as dangerous as as it looks.
And like Miss Bianca mentioned earlier, it takes to wash somebody off their feet takes even less. If it takes a foot or foot and a half of moving water to move a car, it takes a lot even less to sweep somebody off their feet. So definitely a threat. Miss Bianca, what's your one takeaway for tonight?
So maybe even like putting some of all the hazards together tonight. We've talked a lot about burn scars. And I know yesterday we had a pretty active day here in Arizona. I know Flagstaff's not on the call, but in their area, can't speak too much for them, but we do know that they had at least 4 to 6 fires that were ignited yesterday from lightning. And so just for the public to be like aware of where these burn scars are. I know here in our Phoenix area, we have a few that we're closely monitoring every single monsoon season because, like everyone said, it takes such a little amount of water to cause flooding. And there are some big cities and populations, like a lot of people living in these areas around the burn scars. So just to be aware of that is really important this monsoon season.
Very good. Yeah, definitely. You know, we were talking about here, we've been a couple years without a serious burn scar. So this year we're getting back into it. We have one in our area of responsibility. Like you mentioned, Albuquerque has like 3 or 4 brand new ones this year. So we started out with a very dry fire season, and that's caused these fires that have burned. And now, like Alex mentioned earlier, that as soon as the fire goes out, that's my mind goes immediately to, okay, now we have to start dealing with the threat of flash flooding because that runoff is just so much greater, so much faster from these burn scars. Mr. Alex, what's your one takeaway for tonight?
Yeah, Tim, I think, and it was briefly mentioned already, but I think it can be said again. You know, it doesn't have to be raining, or there doesn't have to be a burn scar in your neighborhood or in the area where you're hiking. We have a lot of hiking areas in the Anza Borrego Park and even some slot canyons. And sometimes the rains are a few miles upstream and the sun is out. And we've had vehicles that were parked. They're allowed to drive up there, and they were parked, and they found them a few days later, 2 miles down the road, completely destroyed. And in other cases, we've found logs and debris, huge logs from fires at 8,000 feet where it rained on top of that fire, and the logs made it down into Palm Springs. So it doesn't have to rain where you are to be a threat. So just be conscious of what the weather forecast is daily, especially if you're out hiking or recreating.
Very good, very good. Mr. John, what's your takeaway for tonight?
Well, something very closely related to what Alex just said is if you're driving in a rural area away from cell phone coverage so you don't get your alert, try to be aware of thunderstorms that may be over nearby mountains and you're under a blue sky because of the runoff and you have some arroyos you'll be driving through. Be aware of that because we used to show a series of pictures under blue sky. Thunderstorms were 30 miles away, and this guy took a series of pictures of a wall of water going across an arroyo that he was about to drive through. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Very good. And our last word for the night from our hydrologic expert here, Mr. Craig, sir.
Well, my takeaway would be when your local National Weather Service office issues a flash flood advisory or warning, there's many methods to receive that information. So when your morning forecast calls for strong thunderstorms and chance of flooding, choose your media option, whether it be the classic TV or radio spots or over multimedia. There's really no reason not to get informed when the weather turns and becomes hazardous. Just pay attention. Situational awareness is key to saving lives.
Exactly. You know, we issue the warnings, we put them out on our weather radios, we put them out on social media, and then we work closely with our partners in the broadcast media, whether it's radio or television, so that they can help us retransmit that information out to the public because they have the public, they've over the years, they've got just such a wider reach in public. So they are a great partnership that we have with the broadcast media as far as helping us get that life-saving message out to them. So I really appreciate that. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us. We've gone a little over tonight, but I thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, everybody on YouTube, everybody who watched us on Facebook. I really appreciate you taking the time. Tomorrow is our last Monsoon Awareness Week Hangout. We're going to wrap things up. We're going to kind of cover everything, and who knows what's going to happen between now and then as far as our monsoon threats. It seems like every night we've had something going on. But I really want to appreciate everyone joining me, from Alex, Bianca, Craig, Dan, Glenn, and Mr. John, for joining us tonight on the call. I appreciate you watching tonight. And remember, have a great evening, but stay weather aware. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.